Monday, yippee. It's the McCowan thing, along with that guy over there, Shannon.
The McCowan thing. I think that should be the name
the
of something.
name?
Yeah, I think we should call it the McCowan thing. It's kind of like, it's like, the Kennedy Project, the McCowan thing. I like that. It's good.
Well, it started as a podcast only, and now it's a radio show as well. So I'm not exactly sure what we should be calling it, but
a media event, Bob. It's a media event.
Thank you very much.
I didn't say it was a good event. It was just an event.
I'll try and make it as eventful as possible, given the circumstances.
Yeah.
Watching the Raptors game last night, the thing that has frustrated me for a long, long time is not losing, although they've been doing more than their share of that. 10 of 11 now they've lost. It's the fact that this team seems disinterested entirely in rebounding. And I don't think it's a quality of the or a question of the quality of the talent. I think this is a philosophical thing. I don't think they're the least bit interested in rebounding, and I don't think they're being coached to rebound. And I find it frustrating because, in the days when, I know it was a while ago, when I was taught to play the game, shot goes up, you go to the basket, assuming it's not your shot. And this team stands around.
Even if it is your shot, Bob.
Sometimes even if it is.
Yeah.
And a reflection of that is, if you look at the last two nights alone, the leading rebounder a couple of games ago, 2 games ago, was Fred VanVleet, who was the smallest man on the floor.
That's happened too often this year.
He was the leading rebounder for the Raptors. Last night, their big guy got 9 rebounds, but Kyle Lowry got 8, who's the second smallest guy on the floor. And you're getting virtually nothing from guys like Siakam and Anunoby, who are 6'7" plus. You got to get some boards from those guys. And it's not that they can't rebound, it's that they aren't trying to rebound. And that it goes on and on and on leads me to believe that Nick Nurse doesn't want them to rebound. And frankly, that leaves me puzzled.
That's silly. So,
well,
by the way, my frustration is that I think they played so well on Friday against Utah, well enough to win against, supposedly the best team in the NBA right now. And then last night, I think that was an embarrassment last night. By the way, I have not mentioned the Ohio State Buckeyes today.
Well, we won't. I don't think we should,
because there's no point in mentioning them again. Because they're
they're not the only Big Ten team to go south.
No. Here we go. Misery loves company.
Well, I'll tell you, everybody, everybody was talking about the Big Ten perhaps being the strongest conference in the country.
That's what Morosi was saying.
Yeah, and they're dropping like flies. Indiana, which was who were a number 1 seed, got beat. Was it Indiana or Illinois? No, it was Illinois.
Illinois.
Yeah.
But Michigan didn't. So just for the record.
Well, and Oral Roberts,
yes,
who beat Ohio State, then turned around and beat Florida last night.
Okay, so anyway, that's the end of your lament. That's the end of your lament.
Well, I don't have a lament. They got beat, and I saw them only 2 or 3 times this year. I didn't think they were that good. To tell you, the Buckeyes, I didn't think they were that good.
All right,
so they don't really have a star player. So
let's get going.
We'll take the break, and then Jim Hewson of Hockey Night in Canada, Mike Zeisberger of the NHL.com, some puck talk when we continue on the August program here in March.
The event.
Yeah. Back after these messages. We are back. Yours truly, Bob McCowan, John Shannon, and a couple of hockey pucks with us this morning, today. Jim Hewson of Hockey Night in Canada is with us from Mud Bay.
Yeah. We're not giving anything away, though.
White Rock, BC. And Mike Zeisberger of NHL.com. Where are you, Z? Are you in Toronto?
Southern Ontario.
I think that qualifies too, yeah. We many things to address here. We'll start in no particular order. The Toronto Maple Leafs looked like they were a juggernaut on their way to just sweeping the year, maybe being a Stanley Cup final contender. They were up by what, John? 15, 16 points at one point?
16 points at the beginning of this month, yes.
That has now been reduced to 7.
Right.
And they have shown significant vulnerability over the last 7 or 8 games. Hughie, what have you, I don't know how much you've watched them, but is there something different going on with the Maple Leafs?
It's, one of the things that it's really hard to know, because you would love to gauge them against the other really good teams. Like there are other good teams in Canada. Winnipeg, I think, is a great team. Edmonton's a good team. But I would love to see them play Tampa. I want to see them play Florida. I want to see them play Colorado. Then I get a feel for them. I think they're short of forward. I just think that Wayne Simmons coming back, I believe, helps them. He was a good add at the start of the season. People will talk ad nauseum about their goaltending hasn't been good enough, but I think that, when I look at the way that Sheldon Keefe uses his forwards, I think he's short a guy in his top 6, and they need to add somebody there, in my opinion, because I don't think you can play Joe Thornton as much if you're going to play him on that top line, and they don't want to do that. They put Zach Hyman up there, so they're lacking a little bit of continuity. They're just they're a really good team, but they could be a little better. And then they've had the problem with Matthews, and if he's indeed injured, then that's been a bit of a bugaboo for them. But largely, I would say they're just not quite what they could be if they added another guy.
Would you put Thornton and Spezza on a geezer line, Z?
I don't know about that, Bob, because, you're not going to break any land or ice speed records with those guys on the same line. I think that they are probably more effective if you scramble them around a bit and put them on different lines. We saw how Thornton could be effective up with Matthews and Marner to start the season, but all that stuff has gone into the blender as injuries have come into the fray. I agree with Jim. I think that they need another forward into the mix. You kind of brushed on the goaltending situation, and I kind of find that fascinating, because a guy like Jack Campbell, after they acquired him last year, they really liked him. He played pretty confidently. He was solid. He comes from that Sault Ste. Marie background that Kyle Dubas has. And I really think that, when they're deciding on what they were going to do with Freddie Anderson, obviously he's in the last year of a contract, that there's some in the organization that thought Campbell could be the answer moving forward. Unfortunately, because of his health, and we've seen it in little snippets. I mean, shutout against Edmonton. We saw him get a shutout the other night against Calgary. But I think the fact that he hasn't been able to stay healthy, number one, has hurt the team a little bit as Anderson has struggled. But number two, has, maybe muddled it up a bit in terms of what they want to do with their goaltending going beyond this year.
Mike, do you think that they know that Jack Campbell can be a starter? Because Jack Campbell's never been a starter in this league.
No, but I mean, you know what? When you look at the overall picture, every time you talk to them, they talk glowingly about him. I'll go back and say again, he's got that Sault Ste. Marie connection with Kyle Dubas, and with the cap staying flat. I mean, there's some interesting decisions that the Maple Leafs have after this season. Most notably, at some point, they're going to have to pay Morgan Riley. And I can't see any way where a team, a franchise that has been so in need of a defenseman like that for years, decades, whatever you want to say, would ever let him walk away. So I think he would be the priority. And in their minds, maybe Anderson is the one that you give, that's where you get the additional money from by letting him go.
What do you think of the Campbell situation, Jimmy?
Well, I think that one of the things that you can never really judge until you see it is whether a goaltender can be a starter when he has to go every second night. Boy, it's just such a different world. I've seen it a million times where you think that you've got a goaltender that is really good. You think he's ready to be a starter. And then you put that label on him and give him a chance to play every second night. And sometimes they can't do it. You never know until you try it. So he might be, but we've seen a bunch of guys fail in that position where it's all on your shoulders. You are the guy. You got to go every second night, and you only get a break every once in a while. We're learning a little bit about that. Like Thatcher Demko is a perfect example of that. Sure. He's just figuring it out. Like he's just figuring out how to be a number one guy, and it's mentally, it must be exhausting for a lot of those guys to think I've got to be the number one guy every second night. So I don't know if Jack Campbell is there. We don't know. They may be able to judge that in time, and it may play itself out in front of us, but we simply don't know that at this time. And until he proves himself as a starter, Freddie Anderson's their guy.
But and I'll throw this back at you guys. I mean, if there's a gray area here by the end of the season, and there is that quotient of the unknown with Jack Campbell, do you therefore throw the money at Freddie Anderson? Because that's not a slam dunk either.
But the problem, Zeiss, is going to be with every team. And you mentioned Morgan Riley and you mentioned Freddie Anderson. The problem for a whole bunch of teams, and they're thinking about this right now, is that we got a cap problem for a number of years.
Yep.
And everybody is going to be in the same conundrum that you're going to have to make decisions that a year ago or 2 years ago didn't have to make. They're COVID decisions. They're decisions that are made because the cap has changed, the world has changed, and because of the financial situation, some guys are going to have to go. You're going to have to make different decisions than you would have, and it's not easy for a lot of organizations because there are many organizations like the Leafs that are really top heavy that have to make some decisions that a couple of years ago they thought, the cap's going to go up, we'll be able to deal with this, we'll be able to deal with that, we'll have more money to deal with this guy, and now they're not.
Yeah.
Well, it may come down to this. It may come down, and you guys have kind of circled around this. Who is more important to this team? Is it Riley or is it Freddie Anderson? Because if they let Freddie Anderson go, they presumably will have sufficient money to give Riley the kind of raise that he's going to look at. Now, this is all theoretical.
Yeah, you see, Bob, I actually think they know already. I think Brandon Pridham, who's the cap guy, and Kyle and Brendan, I think they know, which explains to me why Kyle's press conference early in the week, and Mike, I think you were on it, explains why he was so aggressive. Yeah. Because this is, in many ways, because of the flat cap and because of trying to sign guys like Anderson and Riley, this might be the Leafs' year. This might be the Leafs' year to be in the mix to win the cup. And that's why he sounded like he sounded more like Punch Imlach than he did a modern day general manager that's built this thing on analytics and personalities and everything else that he's built this organization on. He was, to me, he was out of character. And I think he was out of character because he knows that the door is closing on this group a lot quicker than people realize.
I just think that, goaltending, as important as it is, we've seen in the last few years that goaltenders can emerge. Okay. Paying goaltenders at hefty prices doesn't necessarily guarantee you anything. And, there was a time where I'd say the goalie's the most important guy in the team. But, I'll reaffirm what I said earlier. I just think that this is a franchise that's looked for a number one defenseman for so long. I mean, I don't know what you think of Kaberle or McCabe, but we can go back to the Borje Salming era. I just don't see any way that they let Morgan Riley go.
Neither do I. I agree with you.
I don't disagree with that at all. But I would say this, that you can sign 3 Morgan Rileys, but if the guy behind him can't stop the puck, you got no chance. And we're seeing it. goaltending is not just a little thing in hockey; it's everything in hockey. So you have to have the guy. Look what's gone on with Vancouver, for example.
Yeah.
I mentioned Thatcher Demko. They get themselves back in a playoff race, whether you consider them in the race or not.
Oh, sure they are.
The fact that they're winning games it's about getting goaltending.
Mm-hmm.
What happened in Edmonton? Mike Smith comes back, starts playing well. They get themselves back in the race. It's just Carey Price. If he comes around, the Montreal Canadiens are a better team. If Freddie Anderson plays better, or if Jack Campbell is the best goaltender, then Toronto's got a chance. So you have to solidify that position. It's Colorado, Philip Grubauer. Just look around the league. Tampa is the best team in hockey because they've got the MVP in goal. It just goes without saying that you have to solidify that position, but that means you have to make a decision about that position too.
Well, so let me ask you, give me your honest opinion on Freddie Anderson as a number one goaltender. Like, what is he? Is he good enough? Is he plenty good? Is he mediocre? What is he? I got an opinion, but what do you guys think? Hughie?
I think he's a number one goaltender. Depends on what night it is, though. He is amongst the number one goaltenders. Not in the upper echelon, but he's like a second tier number one goaltender, I would say.
No, I agree with Jim. It's just that in a normal year, like you said, depending on what night, I think the guy, if you look at his game-to-game stuff, it might drive Leaf fans kind of bonkers because it can go hot and cold. But if you look at the numbers that he's accrued in his time in Toronto, I mean, he's climbing up the list, and you can't just, hide. This is not an Andrew Raycroft situation where the guy ties the team record for victories, but everybody knows, and no offense to Andrew, but he was not, worthy of being mentioned in those other guys in their body of work. What I will say is that, it won't be April this year, but there's too many times in April where we haven't seen the best Freddie Anderson. I'm not among the people that point an accusing finger that the reason that this team has not won a do or die series, whether it's a playoffs or play in the salary cap era, is at least during Freddie's time there, is because of Freddie. But how many games in the playoffs or even the play-ins last year that Freddie Anderson has been here can we wake up the next morning and say, you know what, Freddie Anderson stole that playoff game?
That's the phrase.
That's where I'm left wanting, Bob.
That's exactly the phrase I was going to use was, I want a goaltender who will steal you a game.
Yeah.
And Campbell, you could argue, has maybe stolen a couple of games for them this year. And Freddie does, in my opinion, doesn't do it often enough.
Yeah. The thing with Anderson, I'm an Anderson fan. And I think if you look at the body of the first 20 games of this really compacted schedule, one of the reasons they were off to such a great start was because of Freddie Anderson. The problem is that Freddie Anderson gets tired quickly and gets through these 5 or 7 day windows of not being able to focus because he's tired. But that speaks to me about what goaltending is in this league now. And that means and I think the guys in Winnipeg have it right. Bob, you and I talked to Paul Maurice about this. And he said, Connor Hellebuyck's our number one guy, but I got to make sure he's rested. And I got to make sure that he doesn't play every game because he would. And that's why Laurent Brossoit has to play every back-to-back and has to play once out of every 4 games. And that's really, I think, what the Maple Leafs have missed, particularly with Jack Campbell injured, was they didn't have that quality backup guy so that Anderson could play his 2 or 3 games in a row and then put in the backup guy. Because this is not a one-person position anymore, particularly in this silly 56-game compacted schedule.
When you're playing 4 games in 6 nights,
right,
constantly, every week. I agree, John. The injury to Campbell put them in a position where they had to play Freddie more than they probably would have. The other teams, most of the other teams are in a position where they can give their number one guy the rest that he needs, and the Leafs haven't been in that position. So I would agree with you that Freddie, at the start of the season, I had no problem with what was going on. He was playing really well. Then they had to mix in some different people that they didn't necessarily want to.
Yeah, like friend, you talk about the schedule. Pittsburgh have just finished 5 games in 7 days.
Yep.
I mean, this schedule is wacko, and it changes your whole perspective of not just goaltending. I was actually talking to somebody yesterday in the league, and I asked him, "Do you think we're going to have one player play every game of the 56 game schedule?" You know, because we used to look. I'm a stats geek. I used to look at the numbers and say, "Oh, that guy played 82 games last year. That guy played 82 games last year." I think we're gonna have. I think before it's over, we're gonna have a difficult time finding one guy to play 56 games.
And the other thing is that you see games where like one team is just done.
Yeah.
You turn on the TV and you watch the game and think they have nothing tonight. They're and then you look at their schedule and they're 5-7 or 4-6, and the team is completely.
Well, I would tell you that was Calgary Saturday night. Yeah. I would tell you that was Calgary. Calgary looked like, after the victory they had in Toronto late last week, and they beat, and then they come back on Saturday night, they had nothing left. And I don't know whether that was a combination of the schedule or Darryl, or both, trying to get through the first week of Darryl Sutter hockey. And then they're on to Ottawa this week.
So to circle back to your point, to the point we were talking about, that's where a fresh goaltender, can bail you out.
Right.
No, you guys have all lost your minds.
I was going to say, sorry, Bob, somewhere Felix Potvin is sitting there going like, hey, back in the 93 playoffs, we played 21 playoff games in 42 days. So what are these guys whining about? But obviously the game is different now.
Oh, yeah.
And you need that. And I think Jim made a great point earlier on about Thatcher Demko, because, you know, at the beginning, they wondered about, when do we see the Thatcher Demko that we saw in the playoffs last year? And we're starting to see that. And, you know, for a team like the Canucks down the line, you're going to have to pay Quinn Hughes. You're going to have to pay Pettersson. And that cap, as we pointed out earlier, isn't moving.
Actually, you brought something that's interesting, Mike, because the Canucks are certainly playing better. You know, I think 7 of 8 until Saturday. And they're doing it without Pettersson.
Yeah.
You know, JT Miller has played very well there. Besser and Horvat are played. Yeah. This is the team I thought we were going to see right at the beginning of January with the Canucks. But you have to, you do have to wonder if they can sustain it without Pettersson.
And pay the coach.
And well, I think that's a given. I really do. I just think that, I just think ownership is saying we're not gonna spend until we know what we're up against in the fall, because I don't think anybody knows what we're up against in the fall. Do you, Jim?
No, but I think you're absolutely right. Travis Green's not going anywhere.
No.
Elias Pettersson's not going anywhere, and they made the right decision in making sure that Thatcher Demko stayed.
Yep.
And that on the West Coast, you just call him Bubble Demko. That's what he is right now. He's playing like he did in the bubble last summer, and it's allowed their team to stabilize. And Quinn Hughes is better. Everybody looks better when the goaltender makes a save, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've all lost your minds. I was trying to say that for the last 5 minutes, but none of you would shut up.
So we're way behind you
for years.
Well, look at Shannon brings up the point that Pittsburgh played 7 games in 5 days, or
no, 5 and 7
days, or whatever the hell.
7 and 5 days. That's a story.
We got a double header now,
and we're talking about resting goaltenders. I mean, you know.
Don't give me the Glenn Hall. Are you going to give me Glenn Hall?
501.
I was waiting for Glenn Hall. You know, there's
barely got a good night's sleep.
You know, in the McCowan playbook,
and wasn't a crappy goaltender. He was one of the best goaltenders in the NHL at the time.
Oh.
This whole notion of goaltenders need a night off is just a pile of poppycock. I don't understand it. This is, 2 things are certain. At some point in time, we're going to go back to goaltenders playing every night, and a four-man
rotation in
baseball.
Yeah. I don't know.
These are things that have to happen.
And complete games.
Oh, yeah.
Bob, I haven't seen you riled up like this since the Jays suggested that they go to a 6-man rotation.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, it might be an 8 or 9-man rotation this year, and they'll each throw 3 pitches, and then they'll get too tired. They'll have to sit down and rest. Jesus, I'm doing 5 shows a week at my age, and a 25-year-old goaltender can't play 3 nights a week. Bite me. We got to take the break. We'll come back. We'll talk a little bit about the Calgary Flames and where they are at, and the Sutter influence, and how that might work out short-term and long-term. We'll continue after these messages. Yours truly, Bob McCown, along with John Shannon, Jim HUGHSON, Mike Zeisberger with us. One of the most significant changes that we've seen this year was the Calgary Flames making a coaching change, and a significant change, and that they brought Sutter back after an extended time of
Darryl Sutter.
Yes, not coaching. And the impact, I think, in a general sense, was pretty good. They won a few games. They've kind of chopped a bit since then. Is there a generic for what a coaching change means? You get a short-term kick a lot of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time. But can this old school coach inspire this group in this age, in this era, Hughie?
I guess we're going to find out. So far, so good. One of the things about Darryl is that he holds everybody accountable. That it goes without question. And you don't play well, you don't play. So clearly, Brad Treleving thought that there wasn't enough accountability in his organization and on that team, and that more feet needed to be held to the fire. And so far, I mean, I think you see it, but time will tell. I mean, I wonder sometimes if, and over time, you figure out whether guys like that, whether guys like Darryl, have a longer shelf life now, or a smaller shelf life now than they used to have. We'll see. If guys tune him out, they'll tune him out. But you know what? It's a very, very basic kind of concept.
Yep.
It's do your job, do it well, work really hard. It's like kind of like farming. Do it, you know, you'll reap what you sow. And that's the kind of thing that he's asking from his team. And I don't think we know yet whether it works.
One thing I would say about Darryl Sutter, and it kind of reminds me of the season where a couple of years back where Craig Berube took over the St. Louis Blues. And one of the things he instilled in them was we have to play to our identity. They did not have the type of team that should be playing east-west or fancy. It was dump in, north and south, take out your man. And I did the final 3 series on their way to the Stanley Cup. And they just grinded out wins. Old school hockey, the type of hockey that a lot of people said you couldn't win with anymore until they went into Boston and won a Game 7 playing that way. I think it's the same with the Calgary Flames. I mean, yeah, they've got some nice skill players in Lindholm and Monahan and obviously Johnny Gaudreau. But I think since Darryl's come in, you're seeing guys like Lucic and Sam Bennett, which is an important cog for them because all of a sudden he was going on, you know, from what we heard, he wanted out of Calgary to all of a sudden when Sutter took over, he has a clean slate. And you saw in the first game, he was involved in I think both the goals in their victory, Darryl's first game. So I think that Darryl has, like you said, Hughie, you know, a simple game plan. It's not that difficult, but everybody's got a clean slate and just play the blueprint that makes them effective. Okay. It might not be on the highlight reels, but you have guys like a Bennett and a Lucic and physical players like that can grind away on you like St. Louis did a couple of years ago. And I think if they stay with that game plan, that's the best chance they have of winning.
Yeah, I think the bottom line in Calgary was that some of the star players there weren't listening to Jeff Ward at all. Didn't hear a word that Jeff Ward said. And you know, this is the
Monahan
second trip.
Looks like a different player, Jen.
He does. He does. And I think he was one of the guys. And I think Matthew Tkachuk was one of the other guys that wasn't listening. And you have no choice, to Jimmy's point, you have no choice but to listen to Darryl Sutter. You have no choice. And he doesn't care. And it's the way it is. It's funny, Bob, you said that he's an old-fashioned coach. I'm not sure he is. I just think he communicates a lot more directly than most coaches. I think this guy, like, there's a lot of people that have bad raps about being overly analytic. I think Darryl Sutter gets a bad rap of being an old-fashioned coach. I think he's got a good idea about what the modern game. I think he understands what's supposed to happen, and I think he just doesn't care what other people thinks. And if you're going to do it, you're going to do it, and otherwise you're going to be in the press box.
To your point, John, Darryl has not. I totally agree with you. Agree with you in that. He's the same guy he's always been.
Yeah.
He's never really changed. The game has changed and the people have changed in the game. His direct approach has always been that way.
Yep. He was like that as a player. I don't know if you remember. He was like that as a player.
So yeah, the game has maybe changed a little bit, but he has had to adapt because he's just the same guy he's always been.
And his press conferences haven't changed either.
I love his press conferences.
must watch. He and Tortorella.
Well, if you ask a good question, you'll get a good answer.
Right. Ask a stupid question, and
you get what you deserve.
Well, and I think that's what old style means to me. And I mean, the fact that this guy has coached for a lot of years. I mean, he was off for a bunch, but he has coached for a long time. And by your own acknowledgement, you guys are saying that, well, his philosophy hasn't changed. And he's not going to take a lot of guff from players. And historically, the problem with that is that theory doesn't last long. That agenda, while honorable, doesn't usually last long. The players ultimately get frustrated and will tune that out.
Depends on whether or not they win.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, but only one team ultimately wins every year, Jimmy. So, you better win that cup if you're going to be able to do it. I mean, the guy in Tampa, how long has he been there?
Oh, Cooper, 7-8 years now.
Yeah.
That's a long time in this era for a coach, and he's had success. And I mean, philosophically, is he different? Is he a different kind of coach than Sutter?
Yeah, I think, different character, different person.
Well, sure. We all are.
Well, how many years was Barry Trotz coaching before he won a cup with Washington? And you know what? I mean, it wasn't like he changed his philosophy over those years. It just...
Well, there's another guy, lasted a long time.
Finally got over the hump.
And in a different organization, he wouldn't have lasted as long.
Right. Well, David hates firing coaches in Nashville. David, if you sit down and have a coffee with David, you'll ask him, name the 3 things you're most proud of, but one of them is I never fire coaches.
Yeah.
So we are, bit by bit getting closer and closer. Obviously, it's impossible to get farther and farther from the trade deadline. So we're getting closer and closer. And there's a real thing about it this year with the COVID stuff. I mean, if you're a Canadian team, would you actually make a deal with an American team, knowing that the player you're going to get is going to sit probably for 2 weeks? Brad Treliving is going to join us tomorrow. I guess we'll talk a little bit about that more directly. What would Calgary be looking for? What should Treliving be? Who should Treliving be talking to?
I'm not sure.
Made a big move.
Say again?
I think he's made his big move, don't you?
Yeah. I think when you look at what he did in the offseason by signing Chris Tanev and Jacob Markstrom, and then by changing the coach, I think, and I'm not sure there's much cap space for him to manipulate very much there. I think Edmonton's in the same boat. But Calgary now just needs to fine tune what they have more so than anything else. I think the 2 teams that are going to look to make moves in Canada, because I think Montreal's in the same boat as Calgary. They've made their moves. are Toronto and Winnipeg, because they feel that they're close enough that they need to try to find something to make their team better somewhere.
Well,
and it's difficult. It's difficult because it's not just the 2-week quarantine. It's basically 3 weeks, because you lose the player for 2 weeks and then you got to get him back.
Then you got to get him back in shape.
Playing.
Yep.
That's tough. That's a lot of the season. But I think Calgary's problem will be solved if Darryl makes Matthew Tkachuk the best player on their team.
I agree, Jim, and guys, you know what? I would say the same about Sean Monahan too, because frankly, first half of the season he was moribund at times, and under Darryl we've at least seen a little bit of a spark there. I know there was rumors in Calgary over the last year and a half or so, whether he would be moved or not. They've put their confidence in him. So I agree, like with Jim, like Matthew Tkachuk, but I could say that about all their top players, save for Jacob Markstrom. Their best move is going to be if he can give them a collective kick in the derriere of the hockey pants and get those guys playing like the star players they are.
For fun, who are the 4 Canadian teams you expect to make the playoffs?
Toronto's going to be there. Winnipeg's going to be there. I think Edmonton's going to be there.
Yep.
Then it's a crapshoot.
Then you don't know.
I'm not sure about Montreal. Vancouver's going to run out of runway. That's going to be a bit of a problem. Calgary's got a real shot there, but that 4th spot, I think the first 3 for me are a given. Toronto, Winnipeg, Edmonton. Then good luck.
Well, and I agree with that, and I think it's going to be, the next 3 when you talk about Calgary, obviously Montreal and Vancouver. How fascinating is it going to be in the last 2 or 3 weeks when those teams are going to have to scramble to get in the playoffs? And at some point, it's just, I don't have the schedule in front of me, but it's basic math, because there's only 7 teams in the division, that those teams are going to have to play each other at some point. And we talk about 4-point games. I mean, if there's anything like an 8-point game, those are going to be, that's, I mean, I know the Toronto Maple Leafs, for example, they play their final, I believe, 2 or 3 games against the Montreal Canadiens. And it could be, we haven't seen a playoff series between the Habs and the Leafs since 1979. Cue the Cam Connor references, but
Bob Myers and Tiger Williams.
Yeah, it's been so long. But I'll tell you what, if one of those teams is on the cusp, and the way the standings look now, it's Montreal. That's going to be like a mini playoff series in its own. And I think there's going to be other ones in the league like that, or at least in the division, because of those 3 teams we talked about that are trying to squeeze in.
Now, as one of the Western Canadians on the show, Mike, I must remind you that if Montreal's 4th, Toronto would have to finish first, and there's no guarantee, the way the Maple Leafs are playing right now, that they're going to finish first.
No, but I mean the last games of the season.
No, but I know, but we're trying to set up that playoff spot. We're trying to set up that playoff matchup, because right now it's a coin toss for me that who's going to finish first between Toronto, Edmonton, and Winnipeg. And I actually, if you asked me before the weekend, I would have sided with Winnipeg, and then Edmonton goes and beats them twice.
Hey, listen, apologies to our buddy out in Vancouver right now, but if we're picking like at the beginning of the year, who would you like to see? Battle of Alberta and Montreal, Toronto. And listen, I love Winnipeg and I love all the other teams, but in terms of storylines, I mean, those are, those speak for themselves.
Well, this is 4 guys of a certain generation talking about a Toronto-Montreal rivalry, and I'm just not sure it is anywhere near what it once was. I mean, I think Calgary-Edmonton is an interprovincial geographic. It's got a lot more history to it than Toronto-Montreal. The history of Toronto-Montreal, you got to be our age to know about that history. It's purely theoretical. I don't know, Jimmy.
Yeah, and I don't know. I like Winnipeg playing against anybody.
I agree.
My favorite team in Canada to watch is Winnipeg right now. I think
they might be the most fun team in the league.
They can play any way you want to play. They're big and strong and they're fast. You can deride their defense, but they've got great goaltending behind it. Their defense is held up. They've found some depth in their forwards. Kyle Connor is one of the most exciting players, I think, to watch on a nightly basis. And Nikolai Ehlers has come so far. Yep. I just love the way that they play the game. And so when we talk about rivalries in Canada, I want to see Winnipeg play against anybody. I'd love to see Winnipeg play Edmonton. Edmonton just did them in, but that doesn't mean that they're a better team. There's a lot of things that go into that. So, Winnipeg Toronto games are fantastic to watch too, because you get these amazing skilled players that are on every line. So the interesting thing though is we don't see them play anybody else. Yeah. And it's really hard to get a handle on how good they are.
If a Canadian team makes it to the Stanley Cup final, they would only have to play 8 opponents the entire season.
Yeah. Including the Stanley Cup final, right?
Yeah.
It's sad but true. I say sad, but I just assume it's sad. I don't know whether
it's the reality of the COVID world.
It is.
Boys, we must off. Time is our enemy. We thank you as always. Good to see you both. Hughie, take care. Go walk the dog in Mud Bay. And
he's ready.
Yeah, he's ready. And Z, maybe stain the paneling.
Okay. Hey, we're talking about 1979, so I got the 1979 paneling.
Yeah, it's very rustic, Mike.
Shannon and I will be back after these messages.
Thanks, guys.
McCowan, Shannon, back with you. Again, our thanks to HUGHSON and Zeisberger for joining us. We've touched on this a fair bit over the last few weeks, maybe more than that. And the inevitability of this schedule that the National Hockey League has created out of necessity is that it is almost impossible to assess the quality of the good teams in the National Hockey League. Usually you're going to go into a playoff and you'll have a favorite or two teams at most, in most years. I don't know how you assess or are going to be able to assess going into the postseason who's good and who's not.
Well, and not only that, Bob, it appears that we're dealing with a shortened season, a compacted season of streaks. I mean, this is as streaky as I remember. I mean, we touched on Vancouver's streak on the positive way. The Leafs up until Saturday were on a negative streak. Colorado for the first 20 games of the season was one of the biggest disappointments. And now they've won 6 in a row. Minnesota 2 weeks ago was really good. And now they can't beat Colorado. They lost 6-0 to Colorado on the weekend. There are few teams that are consistent. Tampa is consistent.
Who's the other one?
Well, I think it might be Florida. I think it's the other Florida team.
Could be Vegas.
And you're right. You know what? You're right. Vegas. And yet I watched Vegas play last night. And last night was one of those nights. Pacioretty wasn't in the lineup. They mailed it in LA. They mailed it in. They had won their game in LA on Friday. So we won't, they're ready to go home and play in Vegas this week.
Vegas very rarely is an overwhelmingly good team. They're more often than not, they do what they have to do and not much more.
Yeah, no, but they're a deep team. They now have their two goaltenders back. Fleury, Leonard played Friday, played very well. So all of a sudden that they have strength in that position again on every night. So you don't have to give Marc-Andre Fleury a night off. It's but you don't know measure. The other story, it's funny. The other story that's really missing is Alex Ovechkin continues to be an amazing goal scorer. He's now past Phil Esposito. He scored 2 the other night against the Rangers. And I wonder how much play he's getting, particularly in Canada, but around the league, because he only plays, 7 other teams as well. And, he's had a great season. He's not going to be 50 goal scorer, but he's had a great season, and he might pass Marcel Dion this year.
Well, we don't have to tell anybody what a great scorer he is, a great player. In fact, he is. And I expect that as far as Washington goes during this rest of this season and postseason, he'll be the most significant contributor offensively to that team. We got to get out of here. We thank you all for listening and being with us. And again, our thanks to Jim HUGHSON and Mike Zeisberger. For Shannon McCowan, we'll see you tomorrow. Good night, everybody.